I am what you would call a savant. Numbers appear like shapes to me. For instance, if you were to ask me what is the square root of 3,365, I could immediately picture 3,365 as a sort of three-dimensional hovering pyramid. By studying its shape, and even its pale pink color, I can almost immediately tell that the square root of 3,365 is 58.009. The math just clicks into place. It's really hard for me to explain, but I can use my imagination shapes to process almost any equation. I've always been able to. The mental talent of mind is what has landed me many scholarships, bursaries, and I'm on track for a pretty cushy tenured position at University of Redacted. Life has been very generous overall as a result, and I wish it could have stayed that way. But then I had the car accident, and my ever-useful imaginary shapes became something much more awful. I was driving back from Seattle, feeling smug about my speech at a large college. I felt like I had effectively disproven Galileo's theory of polynomial equations in a room full of the country's top mathematicians. Then my car flipped over. Just like that. Car accident. Never saw it coming. Don't remember it to this day. I woke up in the hospital with my legs and back in horrific pain. A nurse must have noticed my movement because the next thing I knew, a doctor came up and asked how I was doing. All I could manage was a moan. The doctor nodded and asked if I could count to 10. I pursed my lips and did my quivering best. 1, 2, 3. When I reached 4, I noticed a translucent pyramid forming in the corner of my eye. It was really strange, like one of my imaginary shapes, except it had appeared all on its own. 5, 6, 7. The ghostly pyramid began to spin, approaching me slowly. 8, 9, 10. The doctor nodded, jotting something down, and then the triangular shape drifted closer and closer. I could practically hear the pyramid whirling by my bedside. Hearing the imaginary shapes? This was new. I squeezed my eyes shut and groaned through my teeth. "Understandable," the doctor said. "We'll give you something for the pain." When I opened my eyes, the pyramid was gone. Over the next few weeks as I recovered in the hospital, whenever anyone mentioned any sort of number in any way, the shapes would appear, all on their own. It wasn't always a pyramid. Sometimes I saw cubes, cylinders, triangular prisms. They would all hover in the front of my eyes like the tiny floaters you might see on your eyeball when staring up at the sun. Except they weren't floaters. They were more like 3D holograms that only I could see. I asked the doctors if I had some kind of brain trauma, something that could be giving me hallucinations, but they said not to worry. Our minds often produce little stars and optical artifacts after a hard bonk on the head. It should all fade away in less than 6 months. But 6 months came and went. It got worse. The shapes began to group together. One long rectangular prism would form a brow, then an oblique spheroid would form a mouth. 2 small shimmering diamonds would form eyes. That's right. The shapes started making a face. I was actually having lunch with the university's dean, explaining just how ready I was to return to the workplace when I first saw the horrifying face thing. It assembled itself and hovered right next to the dean's head. "I'm sorry we've had to reduce your salary, but it's all probationary. I hope you understand. It won't affect your 403B plan unless..." "David? Hello? Are you with me?" The shapes all furrowed, resulting in a very demonic expression. 2 cones appeared and acted as horns. "David, what is it?" I clutched my eyes shut and breathed through my palms. Only after a minute of binding myself did the faceling disappear. "Are you alright?" A strong metallic taste filled my mouth. After several awkward minutes and apologizing profusely, I explained that it must have been my concussion acting up. The dean nodded with a resigned frown. "Right, let's give it more time." But time only made it worse. Not long after, in the middle of the night, I was woken up by the sound of wind chimes, delicate, ephemeral wind chimes. A dark shadow crossed behind my dresser, and I recognized that same hovering faceling. Its eyes were gleaming. It inched out, wrapping its ovoid mouth as if to mimic the shapes of talking. The voice was the most sterile, synthetic tone I had ever heard, as if a computer had been mimicking the voice of another computer, which had been mimicking the voice of another computer, which had been mimicking the voice of another computer ad infinitum. "Show me." The words came warbling. I sprung up in a cold sweat. "What?" "Show me." I closed my eyes and stuffed in my AirPods with white noise on full blast. It was the only way to ignore the voice that wasn't really there. I thought all of these shapes had to just be in my head, right? Since I was a child, my trick for falling asleep was to count sheep, so that's what I did. 1, 2, 3. But the adorable cartoon sheep in my mind's eye began to morph. Their wool stretched out into long strands of barbed wire, shimmering, angular wire that lengthened with each number I counted. After 8, I stopped counting. The barbed wire collapsed and coiled around the bleeding mammal's soft flesh. I could hear the shrieks of death. No! I threw off the covers and stood up in my room. The translucent faceling hovered with an evil smile above my bed. "Get the fuck away! Get the fuck out of my head!" The faceling opened its mouth, and I could see new barbed wires floating out of its throat, undulating like little snakes. I ran out of my house. The rest of the night was spent walking around the university grounds until the cafe opened. Insomnia became my new friend. I didn't know how to make the visual hallucinations go away. All I knew was that if I interacted with numbers, like if I heard them, said them, and especially counted them, the faceling became worse. Paying all my hospital bills resulted in giving the faceling a torso. Filing away all of my old math work gave the faceling long, insect-like arms. Dialing the number for the psychiatrist gave it a long, tubular tail. I've had many sessions with my shrink now, draining what little was left on my bank account to try and rewire my head to stop seeing this horrible nightmare.
"Just embrace it,"
my shrink finally said. "Embrace it?"
"You've tried everything to make it go away. Why don't you listen to what it wants?"
"What do you mean?"
"It could be your subconscious trying to purge something. If you just let it run its course, it could finally leave you alone."
I thought about what the faceling wanted. All it ever said was, "Show me," which never made any sense, because what could I possibly have to show?
"Can you try drawing it?"
My shrink asked at the end of my session.
"Maybe if I could see what you're seeing, I could be of more use."
And then everything fell into place. It wanted to show itself. The faceling wanted to be presented. It was saying, "Show me." I drew some rough sketches of a snake creature with a demon face and bug legs. The psychiatrist admitted that it looked pretty unsettling, but she and I both knew an amateur drawing wasn't its true form. No, its true form was what all of its body parts created when added together, what all the math counted up to, the equation. My connection with the University of Redacted at this point was tenuous at best, and because my mathematical brilliance had not quite returned to its previous state, the faculty was not exactly excited to have me back. But when I told them I had a breakthrough, that I discovered a formula to end all formulas, they let me have a guest lecture at the STEM hall. A couple curious students trickled in for my lecture. Some of the old profs sat in the back. I explained that I would reveal my theory once I had written it all down on the whiteboard behind me. It would make better sense that way. No sooner had I finished talking than the demon faceling crawled up a few feet away from me. The awful thing had grown into a monstrous 10-foot scorpion with a curved pyramidal stinger. It was hard not to shudder from the sight, but I stood my ground. "I'm not afraid of you," I said to myself. The faceling didn't look threatened. In fact, it appeared overjoyed because it knew what I was doing. I calmly glanced at its colors and angles and wrote the measurements on the whiteboard. 73.46 was the square root of its spine. 406 was the surface area of its claws. 9.12 was the diameter of its fangs. The numbers grouped in a formula that felt as natural as the golden ratio, except instead of eliciting the feeling of completeness or beauty, I started to feel sick to my stomach. "What is this?" one of the professors asked from the back. "Is this related to Galois' theorem?" I continued to write without stopping. I was in a flow state and there was no room for second guesses. I heard gagging from the back. A few students were feeling sick. "David, what are these numbers? Bring us up to speed here." But I couldn't stop. My hand kept writing even though the audience behind me started to writhe and vomit. I did not look back for any glances. The math had to be written out. "Are you bleeding? David, your eyes. What is happening to your eyes?" Warm, prickling liquid poured out from my tear duct. I could see large red stains on my shirt. It was not tears. I squinted and gritted through the pain. The fiery heat in my vision was relentless, but I had to push forward. "For the love of God, David, what is this? They're passing out, the students. David, stop!" I had brackets, exponents, and a couple Greek letters. I was channeling all the numbers from the faceling I could grasp. I understood them perfectly. On the very last line, my formula came to a close. Omega equals delta, parentheses, 4x 23.666, end parenthesis. "David, what is the meaning of this? What is this equation?" I wiped the blood from my eyes and cleared my throat. The lecture was filled with worried expressions and nausea. "It's a mathematical representation," I said. "For what?" I didn't know how else to put it, so I just slipped the word out. "Evil." There came the screeching of 1,000 slaughtered lambs. Everyone's jaws dropped. The massive scorpion faceling, which had been translucent this entire time, suddenly became opaque. Everyone could see what I could see.
Jesus Christ!
What in the world is that? Like a tornado of violent shapes, the faceling lunged forward and gored the front row of attendees. Anyone who tried to run was skewered by its pyramid stinger. I stood in frozen awe, stupefied by what I had wrought. The faceling skittered across the seats and punctured every supple neck it could find. I watched as it gripped the shoulders of the oldest prof I had known and then bit off his head. Blood splattered across the mahogany steps, bodies crumpled to the floor. When the demon had finished its massacre, the face shapes reconfigured into a knowing smile.
"I have been shown,"
it said. Then, as if struck by a breeze, all of the triangles, pyramids, and cubes comprising the creature broke apart. They shot past me through the window on my left. Glass shattered and I watched as the raw arithmetic drifted out into the sky. The shapes had soared out like a storm of hail. The university was on lockdown for weeks after the occurrence. The incident to this day has never been released to the public. 6 students and 3 professors had been killed by something the authorities internally called a, quote, disastrous force, end quote. Though outwardly, they have just called this thing a school shooting. I pretended I too had passed out and had no explanation for what happened. But I know what I did. I had removed the equation from my mind and spilled it out into the world. Like a useful fool, I had inadvertently spread this evil. I posted this story here so that others could be warned. If anyone encounters a strange set of numbers on a calculator or a spreadsheet that feels off, or a rogue pyramid spinning in the middle of your vision, let me know. Whatever this entity is, it thrives on digits. It thrives on math. It wants to use arithmetic to spread itself and wreak untold havoc. Whatever you do, don't interact with it. Don't look at it. Don't listen to it. And for God's sake, if you think something is wrong, if you've had a car accident and you're seeing shapes, do not count to 10. It only makes it worse. What a fascinating story, taking on the concept of synesthesia, which is when your senses get mixed up. People that can taste a color or hear hear a feeling, a touch, a temperature, I don't know. There's a couple senses. But anyhow, it's another short story this week, which I know that generally doesn't perform as well. Sorry about that, but good story. And also I needed this little buffer so that I could finish part 2 of the CSI story finally. So if all goes well, members will be getting that in next week, and it should come out publicly a week or 2 after. So yeah. Thank you all so much for listening, and for being patient on the CSI Part 2. It'll be out soon, and I will see you in the next. Ego Volt Anima Vestra.